this is Constance from Mysterious Galaxy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am super excited because tonight we have author David R. Slayton, and we are here to celebrate one of my favorite book titles to say. It is called White Trash Warlock, and it is just a great fantasy tale about a guy, his name is Adam. There's some magic. There is some questing. There are some ancient and horrifying spirits and artifacts and many just good things that you love in a book. But I'm going to let David tell you more about all of that, as well as himself, more as a writer, how he has brought an awesome book to us today. And I'm going to pop back in to do a Q&A with him more towards the end of the event. So if you have any questions, please make sure to ask them. That's why events are so fun, is you guys get to actually ask the author a question. And this is the Van White section. So if you look down below, you will see where it says ask a question. And as it would imply, if you click that box, that is where you can ask a question. And then also, I am a bookseller. So yes, I am going to tell you that the best way to celebrate a new book is to purchase said new book. And if you would like to purchase this book, there is a buy book button right down there for you. We would highly recommend that you do that. It is awesome sauce. And I'm going to go ahead and leave you with David, and we'll see you guys for questions at the end. Bye, David. See you in a little bit.
See you in a bit. Thank you, Constance. So if my audio, let me know how my audio is. If there's any problem, just put it in the chat, say speak up, or it's getting robotic. I have a microphone headset ready to go just in case, but I'm going to try to project. Okay, good. People say audio are great. It's all about bandwidth. So I think I know quite a few of you on the call, which is pretty cool. And I want to give a shout out to those of you who came tonight. I know it's late, particularly for those of you on the East Coast, or my friend Roger, who is probably gonna have to watch the recording tomorrow, because I think it's really late where he's at and has fallen asleep at this point, and I don't blame him at all. So I didn't intend to do a reading because I don't think I have the best reading voice, and I thought I would just either kind of get more into time of talking about it, or if you wanted to ask some questions in chat. What would you like to know about the book? And Constance will come back for a little bit more formal Q&A in a bit. But I can talk to you about how I wrote the book, or why I wrote the book, what kind of was the origin story of it, or why my origin story, why I came about reading it, and or how it got published, anything you kind of want to know. So just toss it into the chat. So Matthew says origin story. All right, so my origin story is that I'm from Guthrie, Oklahoma, which if you're ever in Oklahoma for some reason, go to Guthrie. It's a really pretty place. It's small town, red brick streets and Victorian mansions. It was the state capital for like 5 minutes. And because of that, it just got all this beautiful architecture. And then sometime, as the story goes, they came in the middle of the night and stole the state seal and moved it to Oklahoma City. And Guthrie was kind of forgotten, and it kind of became more of a backwater. And I grew up in the woods outside of Guthrie on a lake called Lake Liberty. And it was a time and a place where being any little bit different wasn't good. And I definitely stuck out like a sore thumb in Guthrie. So we bussed in every day for school. We drove to town once a week to go to Walmart usually. But I never really fit in. And I felt like when I found books and stories as a kid, I loved fantasy. And I fell in love with magic right away. My first grade reader, the book that they gave us in first grade to read stories, had a story about an invisible puppy whose brothers were visible. And I related to this so much. But a crow teaches him a spell, and he's able to make himself visible and get adopted and move with his brothers. That really, as a kid, connected with that. So I always saw fantasy and magic as this way to either be seen or to become visible, as well as to connect with people out in the world. And as soon as I could start telling stories in some way, I started telling them. And whether that was with toys and making up new stories with my action figures, or building whole worlds out of mud and then drowning them sometimes, I did that. And then when I got older and I started reading more fantasy novels, which fantasy is such an amazing, flexible genre, it has so many incredible stories in it, so many incredible authors, I still couldn't find somebody like me. I couldn't find that bookish gay kid who wanted to have an adventure. And I didn't, when I could find a story with a gay character, they would die horribly, or it was all about coming out, it was all about some AIDS analogy. I couldn't find a book that was just, an adventure story without those kind of gay trauma tragedies. So I started writing them. And several years ago, I had gotten frustrated with trying to publish. I was writing epic fantasies and I wasn't getting anywhere, and I had an agent and it wasn't very successful. So I said, you know what? I'm starting to forget why I like writing, and I'm starting to forget what writing means to me. And I was getting so frustrated, I was ready to give up. So I decided, you know what? Forget trying to publish, forget that I have an agent. I'm just going to sit down and write a book just for me. And I'm going to put all the stuff that I really love about urban fantasy into it. And I'm going to throw out all these rules. I'm not going to write it about somebody who's a detective analogy, really. I'm going to throw out the cops and noir aspects. And I'm going to make it more rural. And you know what? Since it's urban and it's contemporary, let's use Guthrie. And since I live in Denver now, let's use Denver. Let's use, Denver has all this amazing Gothic and creepy, superstitious history. I wanted to use some of that. And as I started putting it all together and I got inspired by certain things, Adam came to me and his brother came to me, that became White Trash Warlock. And on the way to writing this book that was just going to be, it's like I'll put it on Wattpad for free or maybe my website. But as I kept writing it, I was like, wait, this is actually pretty commercial. Like, I think somebody might want this. And so I sent it to my agent and I changed agents. And lo and behold, it was the first book that I got published with. So it was really interesting how writing the book that I thought nobody would want, because at the time when I started writing it, urban fantasy was dead and publishing goes in these weird waves. Like vampires are back right now, but until like 6 months ago, vampires were just dead. You could not sell a vampire book to save your life. Excuse me, until Stephanie Meyer's new Twilight book came out. The one from Edward's perspective, and so now vampires are back for a little bit, and you see this window for vampires is open again. And that's how urban fantasy was. So urban fantasy was dead when we started pitching White Trash Warlock, and then urban fantasy kind of resurfaced. Jim Butcher started writing more Dresden books. Kim Harrison's writing more Hollows books. Urban's had a bit of a resurgence, and I'm lucky that I kind of caught that open window again. I'm just kind of reading through. So that's me. That's where I come from. I basically couldn't find the books that I wanted to read, so I started writing them. And I'm just kind of reading through the comments. So Veronica's asking, what do you find is the difference between the first and the third book? Well, so there's kind of a funny thing about that too. When I first started writing Warlock, I wasn't necessarily envisioning this as a series. Again, I was just writing something for myself. And I began writing the first book, and I knew that I wanted it to have a closure. I don't like cliffhangers, though Warlock does have a bit of a cliffhanger. It definitely has a hook for the second book at the very end. That said, I knew that I wanted the primary mystery, the main reason Adam has to go to Denver and try to make up with his brother, Bobby, who wants to go by Robert now because he's trying to forget his old life completely. I knew that I wanted that story to be told and closed. So while certain big mysteries are left open, the main purpose of the book is, the main question is answered. Now, if you've ever watched a mystery TV show or read a big, long mystery series, you will know, and I learned plotting from reading mysteries and studying mystery authors, you know that there's always a mystery that the detective or the main character can't solve. That mystery will be solved in the last book or in the last season of the TV show. If you look at Monk, for example. So there is a mystery that is introduced in book one that is kind of a larger tangential thing, background to Adam's world. And I think it's in chapter one, so I think I can spoil it. That's the search for his missing father. What happened to his father? Where did his father go when he disappeared? And did Adam get his magic from his father, Robert Sr.? So that question will be answered by the end of book 3. So if we don't get more books, don't worry. I won't leave you with unanswered stuff. All the questions will be answered. I hope we get more books. Blackstone is a fantastic publisher. I love working with them. They've just been amazing to work with. Everything from the cover art to the marketing. They're an incredible house to get to work with. And if we do get book 4, I know how it starts. So, but at the moment I'm working on book 3, and to kind of get back to the question, what the difference is, it's very different because you have to think back to all the stuff that you may or not have seeded. So just having got the audiobook last week, I was so grateful because I needed to listen to it and make sure that I'm fulfilling all those promises I'm making to you, all those mysteries and questions getting resolved. And sometimes you forget little details, like I forgot Adam's eye color for a little while. Did I make them brown like his brothers, or did I make them blue to make him distinct? So I had to go through and read, what color is Adam's eyes for book 2. A lot of authors will keep a wiki, or they'll keep a series Bible offline where they can store all that information. And I did not take those notes because originally I was not thinking this was ever going to be a series. And I agree with the comment. Urban fantasy is a fantastic genre, and it keeps stretching and expanding. You have authors like Shauna McGuire who've been in it from the beginning, or at least a very long time, and she's constantly proving the boundaries of where urban fantasy can go and trying new things. Then you have authors like Katie Edwards, and he blurbed me, which is really kind of him. And I'm just this gigantic fan of his stuff, and he is pushing urban fantasy in many directions, in a more fantastical direction, while being very kind of adult action movie, while working with some of the things I'm working with from like an LGBTQ theme. And I really appreciate his stuff, though I would say his stuff is way more on the R-rated scale, whereas mine's a little more PG-13. And there's the comment that Rick Riordan has to check his own wiki. That's true. I'm a giant fan of Gail Carriger. That's her book, The Heroine's Journey Behind Me. And she is lucky enough that she's opened up a public wiki, which I think might be what Rick has done, for all of her fans to help her. But she had one fan, she said, who put up a whole murder wall in her apartment in London, which was kind of scary in that the woman had put all the string and notes, which is kind of fantastic. All right, let's see what we've got here.
And if you want, I can go ahead. We have lots of questions coming in. So if you'd like, I can go ahead and I can open up into questions we're getting from everyone.
I think that's probably best. I'm not a great reader, to be honest. I kind of took a page from Gail, and that you don't want to watch me stare at pages for 10 minutes.
And you can always read the book, but they don't get to talk to you every time they open the book and read it. So this one, it says, can you tell us more about the Trick or Read program? It sounds amazing.
Trick or Read is something I started several years ago. And I just realized that I like kids. I like Halloween. And as a kid, books were the thing that saved me. Because I did live in a rural area. And my parents got a lot of things wrong. But they did give us books a lot. My grandparents subscribed us to a lot of books, like Disney's Book a Month thing. So we had books all the time. So I was reading a lot voraciously as a kid. And again, I was escaping. I was very happy there. So Trick or Read is my plan to make that happen for every kid. And what it means is we have a big party every year, a big event, and people bring books to the party. We divvy them up into bags. And then as people are leaving the party, they say, oh, I get 20 trick-or-treaters, so I'll take a bag of them. Or I get 40, so I take 2 bags of 20. And then some people don't come to the party, or they don't take books because they've now been doing it themselves. But 2 years ago, by my best estimate, we gave out 600 books to trick-or-treaters across Denver to Greeley, which is north of Denver, and in the Denver area in Colorado Springs. And that was pretty fantastic. So it's expanding, and more people kind of taking part. Even if like my friend Carissa doesn't live anywhere in Colorado, but she's doing it in where she lives, which I think is Massachusetts.
Yeah, that is beyond amazing. As we are a household that loves, I'm looking at my roommate, sorry, she's right next to me, because we're a household that loves Halloween and reading. So that just like all the warm, fuzzy feels of amazing and awesomeness that you're doing that. So thank you, because it's just amazing that you're doing it. Let's see. This question next says, what kind of research did you do when writing White Trash Warlock? And what were some of the interesting things you found that maybe... Oh, I'm getting tongue-tied. Interesting things you found that maybe didn't make it in.
Okay, so a couple of things got cut because my editor is there in New York, and that was very funny. He did have me cut a couple of things that do get to move to book 2 a bit. And when I say he's very New York, it's cute because I use a very rural language for Adam and for his family because they come from Oklahoma, where I come from. For example, it's a jean jacket. My editor's like, wouldn't you say denim? I'm like, no. Or Sunday lunch. So wouldn't you say brunch? I'm like, if you showed up at one of my family events and said brunch, there would be shotguns pulled. Like, no, you don't say brunch. I'm like, come on. Too loud.
I grew up saying the jean jacket too, so saying denim jacket feels weird to me.
Yeah, it's definitely a regional thing though. Like in my response back in the talk changes, I'm like, you are so New York. I don't think he was offended. It's not an insult. But I put a lot of Denver into it. I grew up in Guthrie and I knew a lot of the myth and rural stuff there. However, Denver, I've only lived here about 20 years. And while one of my degrees is in history, I studied ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So I don't know a lot of modern history. And it was really fascinating to dig into stuff. So if you're a Denverite, or if you're a careful reader and a careful researcher, you'll start to figure out that some of the places in the book either don't exist, but it's just because they haven't existed for a long time. So there's a lot of Easter eggs, especially around the architecture that I use. And I drew on places like the Lakeside Amusement Park, which is a fascinating place. There's a guy wrote a whole book about it. Really interesting spot. And so I tried to dive as much as I could into some of Denver's hidden history. One of the things I really wanted to access that I didn't get to was that Denver used to have a thriving Chinatown. Because it was a railroad city, a railroad town on the frontier. And people use the term race riot, but that's not correct. It's really a pogrom, or right. That implies that the Chinese were rioting. It wasn't the Chinese; it was the people who came in and attacked them. But basically, they were driven out of Denver, and Chinatown was destroyed. But we used to have a small Chinatown downtown, like many cities do, or did, and nobody knows that about Denver. And that was eliminated, like in the 1850s. So that was one thing that I had to cut out that I really wish I'd been able to keep. And I'm trying to find a spot for it somewhere. Maybe it'll show up in book 4 if I get to. I have my outtakes file. That box behind me is actually outtakes, little post-its and things I would like to put into a book.
That makes me want to ask then, like, you have a top outtake you can share with us, or do you need to keep them secret in case they make it into another book?
Because I first wrote this book for me, it was much racier the first time. So the romance was way more... I'm not a romance writer, by the way. I really like a fade to black. I'm actually very shy, and I tend to blush and hide if it gets too adult on the page. But since I was writing it for me, the romance was a lot more intense in the first couple of drafts. And I wanted to turn that down. And I'm like, this is no longer just for me. I want this to go out there somewhere. So my favorite outtake was a very intense scene between Adam and the love interest that I decided to leave on the cutting room floor.
Nice. I feel like that's like a ... maybe one day will be in like a special like giveaway if you pre-order or something, because I bet there's a lot of people, if you would ever want to share it, that would love to. We all love a good steamy scene.
Well, and I wanted it to be sweeter. I like that I wanted the romance to be sweeter. And it has gotten a little bit of critique. People say, well, isn't it insta-love? Because it is kind of insta-love. But what's funny is about insta-love is when you're gay insta-love is actually kind of common. When you finally find somebody and you've been alone and you're like, wait, there's another person who gets this and gets me, you often do get together very quickly. So some people say, isn't this insta-love? I'm like, no, this is pretty much how it's often worked for me in life.
I love that. And I think, too, there's something to be said where the sweet emotional part of romance is like very beautiful in its own way, as opposed to like, I mean, we all love a good like steamy scene or whatnot, but the lust versus the love are two very different things to read and to get to experience. So it's nice that you kept like that very like sweet, like warm feeling to it. I appreciate that as a reader. The next question is going to be from Mandy, and she says, "Hi, David!" Exclamation point. What TV shows / movies / books influenced your writing the most?
Good question. So book-wise, mostly books. Warlock is not. I kind of have a very visual mind for it. I'm not people make a lot of supernatural connections right away because they're brothers. But to be honest, I liked Supernatural the first year or two, and this is going to get me in so much trouble. But as Shauna McGuire has said, and I thought she said it so perfectly, it really quickly became a show about Christian mythology. And I didn't want to write about Christian mythology. I wanted to write about other stuff. That's where she got her Encrypted series. So I didn't want to reflect that. I also wanted to dive more into the family dynamics. So Supernatural in its early years, there's a touch of that in there. I love urban fantasy. I read it so much. Shauna McGuire, who I've mentioned a few times, her October Day series is one of my just all-time favorite UF series. And then Terry Pratchett, whose books are behind me. Gail Carriger, who I've mentioned as well. Her stuff, what I love about Gail is her book Solace is a fantastic supernatural mystery, but it's so funny. And it's also my favorite love story in fiction. So if you had to ask me what influenced me, it'd be that. But Adam is distinctly me. He came out of my experience. He came out of my a lot of what Adam went through is what I went through. So while a lot of TV and a lot of books definitely touch kind of on Warlock's composition, Adam this is such a weird book to start out with because it's such an intensely personal book for me.
You're putting yourself right on the page there for us, which I want to say thank you. Because that's like very, very special. And especially when we were talking like a little bit beforehand about how there aren't necessarily a lot of books with these stories. Thank you for putting it out there for everyone who's getting to read it who needs this story. And who just wants an amazingly awesome story that has better representation and awesome characters in it. So I think it's an important thing to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
And speaking of multiple numbers of books, because we have discussed that there are 3, potentially 4 question marks, but this person is asking, when will the second book be out? Excellent question.
So they're currently slated for every October for 3 years. So October this year was book 1. Book 2 is next October, and it's titled Trailer Park Trickster. And if you know how book 1 ends, you're immediately starting to put some dots together. And then the third book is Deadbeat Druid, and I am just about halfway done with it, and it should be out in October 22.
Okay, I have to ask because the titles for your books are just awesome. So did you come up with the titles? What was coming up with the titles like for these books?
So I actually came up with these myself, and I'm very grateful because Blackstone liked them. So if you're ever trying to pursue traditional publication, 2 things you should always know is your cover and your title aren't yours as an author. They're marketing. So if Blackstone Marketing said, you know what, we think White Trash Warlock is not a good title, we want to suggest something else, you generally go with that, right? You want your publisher to be happy with you. And Blackstone's such an amazing partner that I would take that kind of input and run with it. But I think that the title was really strong and they were very happy with it. So they were happy to keep the titles that I've come up with. It originally had a very boring title, which was just Binder, Adam's last name, and which does kind of play into the magic, and that how that name came about will continue to evolve and deepen as the series progresses. But that was so boring. A book called Binder. I mean, who's going to read that, right? So I started just playing with words, and I have an exercise I run where I put an adjective, a noun, and an adjective, and eventually that made, white warlock or certain words started getting ranged, and eventually white trash warlock finally popped out of that.
Well, I absolutely love it, and it's so funny because it's like you said, like titles and covers do affect what people pick up and what they don't, and the title is just so much fun to say, and like the cover and everything, it's like, how do you not want to pick it up and read it? So this one is, the title is so eye-catching. I agree, Matt. So this next question says, how did you develop your idea for the in-world magic? Oh, and the idea for the Reapers. I'm trying to read them as best in the tone that you guys would ask the question. So forgive me if I mess it up.
So you've probably heard the phrase Chekhov's gun, which in writing means if you put a gun on a table, by the end of the chapter, by the end of the book, it has to get fired, right? If you can't bring a story element in and not use it. So I kind of worked backwards on the Reapers a little bit, because the Reaper scene occurred to me, and I'm trying to be less of a pantser. I'm trying to become more of a plotter, but I do kind of make my books up as I go, at least on my first draft, and then I have to go back and hammer everything into some sense of order. So the first time a Reaper showed up in the book, I was like, ooh, how cool would it be if a Reaper showed up? It's like, great. Now, what is a Reaper? What does it mean? Like, what is it? What is a Reaper? So I then had to go offline, take myself out of the book, and sit down and come up with my entire cosmology of death and Reapers and what that means in my universe. And then, so my brain said Reaper, and then my more scientific brain said, okay, great. Now explain that. What does it mean? So, and the in-world magic, I grew up, it's kind of hard to explain, but I have a dissociative disorder. So what happens is if I get really emotional, I get really upset, I shut down, and I tend to go off into my head. And I was a bit of a ghostly kid in that way. Like, my parents were like, he's so quiet, and that's because I was off living in my brain. The magic system kind of came out of that, me taking what I would imagine or where I would go when I was escaping reality, and using that to kind of extrapolating, like, what if that was real? What if instead of just going off into your imagination, you were actually spirit walking? Or what if Adam's character could do that instead? And that's his way of getting out of a difficult reality, for him to be able to go elsewhere in his head, but really go elsewhere. And if he could do that, what does he encounter, and what's dangerous about it, and what's safe about it? Who's friendly, what's not? And that's kind of how I began evolving the magic system. So the magic system sometimes feels a bit nebulous, because it's sort of born from that nebulous idea. It is very dreamlike and softer, as opposed to it being, like, I love Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, but it's so scientific. Like, it's very, you could just see the role-playing, like, game you could make out of it, because this point equals that, and it all just kind of comes together. And I wanted magic to be a little more mysterious and a little more soft. I love books where magic isn't dying, it's not fading, any of that stuff. I wanted magic to be vibrant, living, and therefore I want it to still be a bit volatile and unpredictable.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. And escaping into, like, my head is definitely something I can personally relate to. So magic system based off of that, like, escapism, and the fact that, like, there are pros and cons and dangerous things and not dangerous things, is just, it's so awesome, and it's so unique too. And I love that, like you said, you can have very scientific magic, but I love that you give it a volatile nature, and it kind of has very much a force of nature unto its own. It's like another element almost in that capacity, which just makes it even more exciting. So another question that I want to ask, because you touched on mythology, is when you were creating, sorry, my cat is about to knock over my drink, but so sorry.
He's being well behaved at least. So.
Mine was being well behaved, and then, as cats are wont to do, he then changed quickly. But my question, sorry, is about when you were coming up with the mythology and the cosmology of it. Was it one of those things where, as you were writing, like with the Reapers, it would just be like, ooh, I want to have this character pause then kind of like solidify it a little bit more? Or going into it, did you sit down and kind of create it, or was it a build as you go in general?
It was a combination. So I am a pantser. My first draft is usually sit down and just let it go. I've run Dungeons and Dragons games for a long time, and I'm a long-term game master. And you can see boxes and stuff behind me. And that means that one thing I learned is that characters and players will go in their own direction. So you're like, I'm going to make this really awesome plot, but what if Frodo and Sam were like, you know what, let's go to the ocean, screw this. That's exactly what they'll do. So as a pantser, I'm more of what you call a tweener between plotter and pantser, where I usually have the 5 big scenes, the bullet points. I know this is where I start. I know this is where I end. I know XYZ have to happen along the way, but then I'll let Adam do whatever he wants to get between points A and B. As different magical elements emerged, for example, I knew from day one that the elves were going to be a factor. And then I had to sit down before, so that was something I plotted. What do elves mean in my world? And how can I look at the stereotypes around elves, or what we look at when we think of an elf, usually from Tolkien, right? Or D&D, like we have certain ideas of what an elf is. And I wanted to flip that on its head. I really like taking an established trope or an established idea and trying to twist it or play with it. And then later on in the book, and I won't spoil it in case there's some people on who haven't read it or watched the recording, there are a magical race shows up that are kind of unpredictable or not something you usually see. And I did that because I wanted to do something new. I'm like, okay, look, what do I see in urban fantasy? What do I see in fantasy? And what do I don't see that often? So let's go with this race. Let's add something kind of new and different to the mix that will make it more unusual.
That in and of itself is like a good carrot to just go and read, so you can find the interesting new like magical race.
Oh. Kind of real.
I think that's. I like this question a lot, especially because this book is such a personal one. Adam, came from you. Are you ever nervous to share your writing, and who is the first person you share it with?
So I am terrified of showing my writing. It's getting better as I write more books. Warlock is about the 4th or 5th book I wrote. Sometimes I truly lose count because I've written so many novels. In my first one, but I learned, I feel like books are like mushrooms. They have to grow in the dark. So when I have an idea, I don't send it to my freelance editor or my agent or my critique group too early. I let it sit and ruminate for a long time. Like I came up with a pitch for something today and I bounced it off my partner because it's supposed to be funny. So I wanted to see if he would laugh. And he didn't. So it's like, okay, I want to take that back and spend a little more time on it, right? Again, let that mushroom grow a bit before I send it to my agent or send it onward. And then for me, it's kind of like cleaning up for the maid, right? Someone's going to come in and see your house. So before I send my writing, I try to make it the strongest thing I can before it goes to my freelance editor, James, and before it goes to my agent, and James is the process of like having a maid before it goes to the maid. Before it goes to my agent, Leslie, I really try to get it into the best shape I can. One of the things about traditional publishing is you really do own it. It is yours. There are a couple of typos that I didn't catch, and they're on me. So your editor is your partner, absolutely, but ultimately it's my book. And if there are things that I wanted to change, like one thing I'm becoming hypersensitive about is pronouns, both from an ableism as well as a equality standpoint. So I'm trying to use pronouns that are more accurate. I'm thinking of somebody who's reading it who might be blind and can't look at the page, so they're listening to it, and if they don't have it on the Braille e-reader, I want the sentence structure to be in such a way that they know Constance said that, not David, or David said that. So you might notice my pronoun structure is, and hopefully it'll evolve with more books. I'm trying to become more conscientious of somebody who only can listen to it, who can't read it, or can't process the page line layout to figure out who's speaking, who's the antecedent. So I'm trying to get those kinds of things more consciously in, as well as, like, for example, my day job, I no longer say guys, I say team. Thanks team as opposed to thanks guys. I'm trying to become more conscious of gendered language and to be more neutral when I can, which means I'm playing a very careful game of using fewer pronouns in order to avoid gender as well as maintain clarity.
I think that is so awesome because reading and what you experience with your eyes, like I've even seen, this is kind of random, but it connects a little bit. I've had one person who does makeup and they were like, I'm going to try doing a tutorial, but without watching the video, only being able to hear it. And the experience is vastly different. You take for granted your eyes, and yes, you'd be like, oh, but they're reading the words on the page, but it's still such a different experience when you're reading a book versus an audio. Oh, yeah. Some mug love. Yes. This mug is absolutely amazing, Alex. I agree with you. But it's so true that it's such a different experience if you're reading versus listening to something. And it's awesome that you're thinking about that and all of the different things, plus as well the equality and inclusivity of it. So that is beyond awesome that you're doing that. The next question is a craft question that we have. This one is from David. It says, I'm 2/3 way through and seeing what I think are hints about things to come a la Chekhov's gun. Do those things happen organically while you're writing, or do you go back and specifically salt these things in the text?
Those kinds of seeds are a second. They're definitely after the first draft. The first draft is a splat draft when you're pantsing. But then as you begin to go back and say, okay, the last thing I always do is I go back and edit the first chapter or rewrite the first chapter again. And once I know the larger structure of the series, particularly, by the end of the first draft, I sit down with it and I analyze it, and I realize, okay, there's definitely some questions I'm not going to answer. That's the big mystery that I'm solving in book 3. In which case, how much can I get away with? And how much can I tell you to kind of keep you interested, to keep the reader from getting bored without giving away the show, right? Mysteries are always a little bit of a tease here and there. You know, the fish pops up and then it hides again. You have to keep chasing it throughout the series. So I definitely see it on my further drafts. My first draft is always really rough, and then I have to go back and do a lot of polishing. I'm a big believer in getting the whole thing done before you edit.
I think word vomit, as non-pleasant as it may sound, is actually something that's very useful, because one of the things you'll hear people say, like you'll hear authors, and you can relate to this, like sometimes the hardest part is actually just writing a whole book. And then you can go back in and work on it, but like just be proud of actually finishing and writing the whole book, and then you get to go in and you get to knead it and form it and shape it and make all the edits that you want.
Absolutely. My friend Jordan is writing a book now, and I think it's one of these ones he's tried to write a few times where he hits a certain point and then he kind of moves on to something else or gives up. And I'm encouraging him to push through, like, get it done, and it'll be so much easier to go back and make it better and stronger if you have a whole book to work from.
And then plus, you know what, even if you finish it, you're like, you know what, scrap it, nope, don't like it, didn't work out, you know what, at least you finished it. And you won't have it constantly nagging in the back of your brain of like, did I not?
You kind of put it to bed.
Yeah. The next question we have is, White Trash Warlock really is such a book about family relationships. What are your favorite types of relationships to write, and why?
It's a really good question. I love books that surprise me, and I like writing relationships that don't go the way you think. My friend Sarah J. Henry, in her book A Cold and Lonely Place, it's a great mystery, and the victim's sister shows up. And the woman, Troy, the main character, is dealing with the mystery. It would be normal in most mystery fiction for that sister to come in and she and Troy to be enemies right away. Her to suspect Troy and for them to be at odds. Instead, Sarah has them become friends and they team up. And it was such a nice flip. So I like relationships that can surprise me, and I like situations where characters don't do what you would expect them to do. I don't want to spoil too much, but that's Vic and his family. When I wrote the Martinez family, I really wanted them to be everything that is not a stereotype about them, and for them to flip them around. They're also a mirror to the Binder family. They are very different than the Binders, and they work kind of in opposition. So Vic's mom, Maria, is completely the opposite of Tilla. She is very open, she's very direct, she's kind of blunt, but in a nice way. Whereas Tilla is much more of that Midwestern, Southern woman who's probably got a lot of stuff smoldering, right? She cooks a lot, and Tilla cooks constantly, and that's part of what's going on. Is she's constantly, smoldering things and constantly turning things over and letting them simmer. And that's the women. Those are the women that I grew up with, and the women that raised me, my grandmothers and my mother.
I'm from the South, so I can definitely relate to the fact that you may not say a lot, but you have a lot smoldering underneath. I know many people like that. You're just told to smile and act like everything is fine, but the murky thoughts beneath. Oh goodness!
And when the volcano explodes, it's a true. When they finally snap, it's usually a big deal, right?
Well, when a Southern woman snaps, hell hath no fury. Run away. Just run while you can.
Yeah, and you better hope she's not anywhere near a cast iron skillet, because that's coming for your head.
Seriously, though. Okay, the next question we have, I asked this one. I always like to ask authors this, and it is, what part of this book was the most challenging for you to write? Then conversely, because we always talk about the hard parts about writing, but what part brought you the most joy to get to write?
I'm smiling about the second half of the question, and that was Vic. Every scene with Vic was just a joy, because he kept surprising me, and he kept doing things I didn't expect him to do, and that was so different, because he's kind of the opposite of Adam in so many ways. He's one of my favorite creations. I love him. And Argent, I love Argent. She's just fantastic, and she's so much fun. Every one of my books has a character like Argent that if I'm not careful, she will steal the entire show, and she's very much that character who rides in, does something really awesome, and then rides out. I kind of based her on Mae West. So she has a lot of Mae West look and energy to her. So she's just a blast to write. The hardest parts were the family stuff, because the family stuff came from my experience. And a lot of the very personal things that I put into it, I fictionalized and embroidered here and there, but I used a lot of what I actually grew up with and what I actually went through, or what I saw, and that was tough. So those were, and I am not fun to live with when I'm writing those scenes. I'm writing one of those scenes now for book 3, and my poor partner was like, okay, I'm just going to go hide from you. You're just emotionally distraught. They tear me up, because I get very involved with how the feelings are.
Did you feel like, was it cathartic in any sense? Was it able to help you kind of, I don't know, work through or address anything from your past, since it is so closely related to it? Or
Absolutely, and that's where writing can really, one of the things I've learned about trying to become a published author is that most books don't emotionally connect with the reader. And I think that's why most people are unsuccessful at publishing, is the reader reads it. I read so many fantasy novels where I'm like, I just don't care. Right, they're super powerful, which Adam is not, and they're this and they're that, but I don't care. You're just bored. Yeah, you're awesome, but I don't connect with you. I don't have an emotional connection to you. I need to understand you emotionally to want to spend 900 pages with you, which will what these 3 books will come to, right? So I really wanted emotion in there, and I wanted it to be in the way that I experience emotion, because I figured out that the way that I experience emotion is not the normal. Again, I'm just associative. So when I feel something, I feel it usually in a term of color, or not necessarily in the same reactions that most people will. So Adam's reactions are much closer to mine. I started working with a bioenergetic therapist, which is a really very hippy-dippy boulder kind of thing. It's the most hippy-dippy boulder thing I've ever done in my life. But she was amazing because she'd say, all right, I'm going to hand you a dish rag. And I want you to think about what makes you angry, what you're angry about. And I want you to talk about it. And as you talk about that, I want you to wring this dish rag. And then I want you to feel, how does that feel? And then we're going to describe that and we're going to capture it. So as I wrote this book, I spent every week in therapy with her working through, okay, how do I process anger? How do I process joy? How do I process love? All of those facets. And then literally would leave therapy and take all these notes and then pour that into the book.
That is absolutely amazing. And I think you totally hit the nail on the head with that too, because I'll talk with people, and when people ask me what kind of reader I am, I'll always tell them that I am someone who reads for characters over like setting. I'm like, you could have two characters, and if I'm in love with them and I care what's going to happen and I'm invested, you could have them on an elevator for the whole book. And you know what? I probably wouldn't care as long as I'm invested in them and what they're doing. But if you have characters I don't care about and they're in the most beautiful of settings, I'm like, it's like you said, you're like, it's cool, but I don't care. You don't have that emotional thing. So as like a reader, you saying that, that calls to me so much, because that's one of the most important things to me.
It's so crucial to me that for every book, I make my agent cry at least once. And so she's always like, okay, I'm like, but did you cry? And she's like, hang on. She's like, yes, I cried. Like, that's what I need to hear. I need you to mark down where you cry.
You're like, my priority is to bring tears. If you do not cry, I have not been successful and I need to go back. Don't give me any more edits. Just wait.
Precisely. And I've had readers reach out and say things like I can't tell you how many readers have reached out and said, I just want to punch Bobby. Like my friend Aiden this morning, he's like, I just want to punch Bobby. He messaged me that. I'm like, oh, awesome. I'm doing my job right. And my friend David is like, I just hate this guy. I'm like, okay, good. You're feeling that visceral, hatred of this character.
That's the best thing, is when you want to actually like punch a character because they get that much of a reaction out of be like, oh, you know something was done right. The next question we have is from Jenna, and it says, how is it to combine romance and urban fantasy? Who are the mentor authors in romance for you?
Again, Shannon McGuire and Gail Carriger. I really am a strong believer that I love a good love story. And I believe in happy endings, which is very much a romance thing. However, I believe they have to be hard-won. So if you look at the romance in the October Days series between Toby and Tybalt, for example, and I've just spoiled that if you haven't started the series, but it happens early enough that you'll get it. Sorry. And then Gail Carriger's Solace. Again, I love the love story in Solace. And Solace is definitely more on the romantic side. But Dorinda Jones, who writes Paranormal Romance, her Charlie Davidson series is amazing. She blurbed this as well. It's definitely more on the adult romance side. So I love the books, but do watch out if you're not into the erotica at all. And I wanted romance because, again, when I get a book with a gay character, one of the things that frustrates me so much is there are two settings. They're either hypersexualized, and you have a whole vein of male urban fantasy, which is written by women, and it definitely is more on the erotica side sometimes. And that's not for me. I'm very much a fade to black, PG-13 kind of person. I don't want those details in my books. But at the same time, and then on the other end of that, you have the sexless gay who's like the clown or isn't allowed to be. They're not allowed to be romantic. They're just there for comic relief, or they're just there as a side character. So that's one thing is I didn't want that. I wanted a fully formed human being, and that includes love and hates and anger and romance. And it was really important to me that this book have a love story.
I think that is such a good point, because especially like I remember, and admittedly the series went down a very windy path, but Laurel K. Hamilton was someone I used to read vampire books for. And that really is such a good point, in that the hypersexualization, or it's like a friend character, and it just creates a very hard space for them to exist in like no, I'm just a person here having my romance story with the good and the bad and the all in between. So just like chef's kisses for having that in there, because I hadn't necessarily thought of that, but then you said that and my brain clicked and I was like, no, that's exactly right, and like how it is normally represented. So
there's also a real problem of kill your queers or kill your gays, where we give you a gay character and then we kill them. Tara in Buffy, right? And if I'm spoiling that, it's been 20 years, get over it. But that's a perfect example of here's this great relationship with this great character, and then in order to kind of engender sympathy, we're going to kill them. And I think a lot of writers who do that are coming at it from a place of good intention, right? I'm going to show you that this person's human and you cared about them and I'm going to kill them, but then you killed them and I don't get them back. Gail handles her gay relationships in her series so beautifully, because she has this fantastic vampire, and I don't want to spoil it because if you haven't read it, you really should. But the love story for the vampire and what happens to him in his love it's tragic and beautiful, and I do love that those characters, you get to see what happens with those characters over time, because again, they're immortal. So.
Oh. And also too, I feel like now Gail's a good rec too, because if you need humor in your life, she's got a wicked sense of humor in those books.
She's amazing.
Oh, so let's see. Next question is, do you have any other series coming in? I don't think you do, because we've been talking mostly about the series, but do you have any other series coming that you can tease us with?
Not right now. I'm committed right now fully to telling Adam's story, and I'm really excited about that. I do have other series that we in time will shop, but right now I'm kind of dancing with the one that brought me, Adam, and I'm really loving Adam's story. We do have a spinoff in the same universe set that we're looking at, and it just depends on how the books do and if people want more, and they kind of show that through buying it and reviews and things. I'm hoping that it does more. I'm hoping we get more. If we get more books in Adam's series, I have up to 9 loosely plotted, right? Again, I know how book 4 starts, but I'm prepared if we don't or if we need to put it on pause or we don't, I'm prepared to be at a good place with 3. And then again, I have a spinoff we're working on. And then my agent has a whole stack of other things that we'll talk about next year when I finish telling Adam's current story.
Nice. And the next question, I always love seeing this one because it's like the books, aka skeletons in your closet that have not seen the light of day. But it's I didn't realize, this is from Andy, I didn't realize that WTW was the 3rd or 4th book you'd written. Can I ask what happened to your first manuscripts? Do you think you'll revisit them, or did you originally pitch those to get your agent?
I have a trunk novel. It was called Neophyte. Again, bad titles, so I learned to get better at titles. That is that will never see the light of day. It's a 200,000 word brick, and it's terrible. It did get me a full request from Kristen Nelson, a pretty high profile agent back in the day, so I'll give it that. But yeah, that is dead and buried, and my Warlock is dedicated to my friend Jo Dunn, partly because she has read everything I've ever written, including that monstrosity of a novel. The other novels I have 3 epic fantasy series. I can't even do fingers today. That are, one of them got close and stuff happened, so we had to cancel the contract. But that have actually sold. So if you ever Googled me and realized I had another deal first, like what happened to that book, stuff. So, but that book is out there. And then I have what I call my Feral Firstborn, which is an epic fantasy that is really near and dear to my heart. And it is it's on what's called an R&R with my current publisher, Blackstone. So when Adam's story is done, then I will get them those changes that they requested and see if they like it and see if they want it. And I hope so, because I love working with them. They're just amazing.
Blackstone is a really cool publisher. I'm glad that you're with them because they do take good care. They take good care of authors. And also, too, I'm intrigued by these other fantasies. I'm like, I want, and out of curiosity's sake, now I just want to read the 200,000 page book, which is not something I normally say I would read out of curiosity, but I'm like, but you have me intrigued now.
I will say this. I did take that book because I had been working on it for a long, long time, which a lot of writers do. That's your apprentice book. And I ripped out the skeleton. I took the characters and the core of the plot, and I completely rewrote it from there. So while you can't read that book and you'll never read Neophyte, you will hopefully someday get to read the book that basically it spawned once I stripped off all the stuff and learned how to write a sentence and how to close a plot loop. So I do have that book completed, and that is again on my agent's desk, and that's my agent's favorite book. So I'm hoping she'll take a chance to see that one, see the light of day.
Well, that is super exciting, and that also goes to show too that like you were telling your friend, you should always push through and finish the book, and who knows what will come of it in its many reincarnations. And we are getting close to the end, so I'm looking through the questions because you guys have been so awesome about asking questions. Well, we have time for one more. And I want to get a good one about, okay, how about, let's go with this one. And it says, have you run into scenes as you are writing these books that are hard for you to write? And if so, what makes them difficult? And I'm going to add to that because I know I kind of asked you like a question similar earlier where you talked about like what gave you the most joy and then what was also the most challenging, which was the family. But I want to know too, in kind of adding on to this, do you prefer writing action scenes or dialogue? And which one comes more naturally?
So I talk to myself 24/7 in the shower. I talk to the cat. At least I can pretend I'm talking to the cat. But I test dialogue out loud all day, constantly. So I'm constantly walking through the house muttering, or in the car, wherever I am. And what I'm doing is I'm testing voice, especially if I'm trying to get to humor. And I'll do a scene. I'll literally be making coffee or lunch, and I'll be doing a scene out loud as I get through. I'm like, no, that punch that up. And it was frustrating reading the audiobook because I'm like, oh wow, I should have punched that up, because my brain's constantly like, how can I make that funnier? How can I make that stronger? So I prefer to write dialogue because it comes more naturally. And I love action scenes, but I always want to avoid like the Dragon Ball Z problem where it's just half an hour of everyone punching each other. So because I do read a lot of comic books too, I try to make, you can see that, like, especially if you look at Argent's scene, she's quipping, right? She's drawing these massive swords and doing all this stuff, but at the same time, she's quipping. And that's a very comic book kind of thing. There's a lot of X-Men, Justice League, Teen Titans energy going on with my characters when they're in battle.
You mean you want like 5 episodes for one Kamehameha to happen in your book?
It's exhausting.
And then it's the weekend, and you have to wait for the weekend for it to like get to the next episode. You're like, I just want to know what happens.
I love my nephew, but he used to subject me to days of Pokemon, and I'm like, this is killing me. I need more depth, dude.
Slowly but surely, you're like, I can feel my brain dying. Well, I want to say, unfortunately, we are at time for the event. David, it has been so much fun just getting to talk to you and talk about your book, White Trash Warlock. It is on shelves. Go out and buy it today, people. Just because it's such a great book and you're such an awesome author, and this was a treat. Thank you for sharing yourself with us and our readers tonight, and your friends who, you know what, you guys were very friendly heckling. You're very good friends, for everyone who came. And just thank you so much. David, is there any final words you'd have to say, or we can go ahead and say goodbye? Or
I'll end on, thank you all so much for coming. If you have other questions or you want to know more or see what's coming, just find me on the web, David R. Slayton. Don't forget the R. There's a lot of David Slaytons out there. You can just, if you Google me, I'll pop right up if you put the R in. I've got a website, on Twitter, all that stuff. So I really appreciate your time tonight, everyone. Especially those like Roger, who I know it's so late for you.
But for a worthy cause. Insomnia for a worthy cause. Well, thank you so much for joining us, David, and everyone else. And very happy book birthday. I know today is obviously not the book birthday, but still very happy to have it in the world to White Trash Warlock. And we will see you all next time. And have a great evening, everyone. Good night.
Thank you so much for this.